and double check. Let me go open up a screen here and
Yeah.
see if it is.
Take a look here.
Oh, I can just click this link here. Waiting for Schusterian. There's two people waiting. Oh, very nice. There's two people waiting.
Yeah. I think one of my buddies is about to get on. He's about to
Oh,
share it to his LinkedIn for you. Yeah.
oh, nice. Double
Shout
check.
out to
Let me go
Chris.
open up a Hey, there
Can
it
you hear
is.
me? Awesome.
All right. I think we're good. Alrighty,
Yeah.
cool. So honestly, this is very, very informal. We don't really have to much to talk about. So anywho, if you're listening in on the chat, we are on the Hello World Discord channel as well as the top chat here. So I kind of got all my screens open up here to try to capture this. So we'll kind of take this one step at a time. So Nick, what are you interested in chatting about today? What's on top of mind today?
I actually have a lot of questions for you after reading your article, to
Oh,
be quite honest.
all right. Let's go ahead. Let's do it.
I want to know more about this story, how you got a job in artificial intelligence and things like that. Like, I want to hear it
Oh, right.
from you.
Yeah, I realized this was probably the best story I had when I was given a talk on
Definitely.
this, and I got to the end and I realized this happened to me, but it was something quite special. So, all right, I guess I'll start at the beginning. So, what ended up happening is I was, figuring out. Let me get this. Okay, so I was in the process of figuring out my resume structure, and I was very, very bad at figuring out how to define my value because I was still at that point where a resume is supposed to be a totally true reflection of who I am, as opposed to seeing it as a piece of marketing to go and get me a job. That was a transition that was starting to happen. And so like I experimented with a couple of different resume approaches and eventually got to a point where like I just wrote literally a resume that said Python developer at the top, wrote everything else, and that was like the magic. That's when the magic started. That's when I got a lot of applications. So that's when I just started going apply. And yeah, and then funny enough, like I can't remember applying to this job. That was the thing. Like I don't I went on LinkedIn at that point. Fast apply was really a normal thing, right?
Right.
Because like, and this is actually the second time this has happened where I've gotten a job for a role I can't remember applying to, just because the process was so automated. The first one being working for HC1, which is a whole different story. So when I was going through the process, I was applying a lot of jobs and I knew I had Python skills. And that's the thing. Like I had 7 years of Python experience. I had a lot of SQL, I had a lot of analytics. So there was a lot of good stuff in there, but there were also lots of jobs I just wasn't able to apply to, even with a good background. So
Yeah.
anywho, I go and I remember I'm in a coffee shop in Indy, and all of a sudden I just get the 919 phone number, and that's for Raleigh. And I'm like, oh, okay, recruiter. Pick up the phone, get the call, and he's like, hey, yeah, is this Brian? He's like, yeah, it's Brian. It's like, oh, great, I got this. Looks like you applied to a Python role. Manager loves you. We want to go and talk. And I thought, oh, great. And usually at this point, there's usually early details on what's the role like, what's happening, what is it doing there. And I get none of that. Now, here's the thing. Like, I'm used to figuring it out on the roll. I'm pretty impromptu there. But I mean, I literally got no indication. I was asking questions. And the truth is, the recruiter didn't seem unknowledgeable about it, but at the same time, like he didn't seem to really give me any details. So I went 20 minutes, had a great discussion there, and at the end I was just kind of like, hey, what happened? Or I'm sorry, hey, just in case, for the next interview, would you mind sending me the resume or the job description again so I can review? And he was like, oh yeah, that's fine. It was very casual. I go and get it back, and it was like this senior AI data scientist was the role, and I was like, holy fuck, like, because I'm going through the details and I'm looking and it's like there is just none of this really lines up like what I'm going through. So like I'm looking at the role description and like it was a very research heavy role. I was looking at it I was looking for what they were looking for. I mean, literally like 10 years of experience, PhD preferred, master required, different in like, you need to have these experiences with blockchain, you have this experiences with AI. And that's the thing, like like Schusterian careers, what I'm doing today is really the level of blockchain that I understand. I understand what the industry has to offer, and I can explain it great to a layman and even people who
Right.
are entering the industry. But I was by no means an expert, like at all in it, and certainly not to the level that I would call it PhD quality or even master's degree quality.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
so anyway, I look at it and I just kind of dismiss it. And I'm thinking, oh, well, I'm never going to hear about the, I'm never going to hear this again. So I didn't really say anything, and I really didn't expect to hear anything back. Well, a week later, I get a call from the same guy. He says, "Hey, hiring manager wants to talk to you." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." Like, and that's the thing. I'm playing it really coy, where I'm not saying no, but at the back of my head, I'm like, I don't know what to do here. So I mean, I remember going to my wife and sitting down with her. I'm like, I don't know what to do here. I don't know what to say about the, to say this. Like, do I play it easy? Do I, tell them I don't do it? Because I'm literally looking at the role and it's like, there is nothing in my background to justify the level that they see. They're talking about it. I'm
Right.
thinking it's a mistake. And
Yeah.
personally for me, I was trying to avoid more pain because earlier on in the process, I had the worst interview I've ever had because I was talking to the CTO of some shitty little consulting firm in Raleigh. And like at the end of the thing, it was for a blockchain role. And I knew I wasn't I mean, I knew it'd be a learning role for me. And everyone else was said, you may not be qualified, but let's pass you up. Well, basically he I was asking what blockchain I had, and he was asking for like enterprise tech and all these things. And I just didn't have it. And he says, well, Brian, you're a blockchain lightweight. I mean, he said that to me. So that was still heavy on my mind. So I wanted to avoid that pain. But at the same time, it's like, I mean, look, I want to get an offer. This seems interesting. I don't know what they're looking for, but I need to go to the offer and do that. So it's like, okay, I'm going to play this straight. So I went on the call and I decided really that one, I wasn't going to say I wasn't qualified. I was just
Right.
going to say, here's what I did. Here's my background and everything.
Here's
I
what.
went
Yeah.
through. Right.
Right.
And did that. And it's just pure confidence and just what was on the sheet. No bullshitting,
Yeah.
nothing. If I was asked if I had experience, I wouldn't say yes or
This
no.
is me. Take it or leave it.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
This
so
is what
anyway,
I can do.
get on the call. We had this guy with this beautiful, elegant, British accent. I mean, very soft spoken and just amazing. And so he starts off and asks me about my background and I'm like, okay, fine. So I'm sitting in my basement, pacing around, and just telling him like, here's what I did, here's how it went to, here's my analytics background, here's how I built with Python, and I did that for about 15 minutes. I get to the end of it, and he says, "Well, Brian, that sounds great. Here's a little bit about the role." Literally no hesitation, nothing. He never asked about AI or data science or anything. He just told me what the team did. And I had questions about it too. I mean, because that's the thing. I knew enough about data science to talk about the different pieces. And it's funny, as a manager now, that's one of the most common things the managers of technical people tell me. They can pretty much bullshit a resume, an interview and talk about those details and not know anything about the underlying function. They couldn't do
Right.
it. And that's the
Right.
thing. I knew enough about data science to have intelligent questions about the process and enough curiosity, genuine curiosity, that it got me through. But again, nothing that looked like AI. So anywho, he had a discussion and went great. And I remember going up to, Laura upstairs and I'm like, okay, I think that went well. I don't know what to make of that. So anywho, another week goes by. I get a call with a recruiter. They want to fly me down to basically go and talk to me. So I go fly to the office, in this big, beautiful office. I go and, sit in this little room. Then all of a sudden I start talking to the people who would have been my peers. Again, PhD, NLP expert. They had some really interesting problems too. Like the problem they were trying to resolve is figuring out how to translate research papers automatically, basically, that you could read it in English but then translate it to another language, but get the formatting right. It was a formatting issue. Because
Okay.
if the language goes from horizontal to vertical, there needs to be some intelligent placement there.
I
And they
see.
had a huge number of people internally at the company who were designed to basically go and do that. And if you get a
Right.
tool that helps figure it out, and that's what AI is really good at. It's really good at automating low-level tasks that are easy to
Yep.
automate and things that you don't necessarily think are automatable. Just if it's a process that can be take it from step A to step B, it's pretty good at figuring those out. You could cut down significantly on the problem. So I kept focusing on the business problem and the technology and things like that. And it ended up being a pretty good discussion, but still, these guys were in a class of their own as far as technology. I mean, they literally were leaving academia to go, get paid in research, basically, to do that.
Right. Right.
So they leave. I get the next guy coming back, and I get the manager who was hiring me, and the other guy who was basically the silver-haired dude, and I gotta say, I didn't get to talk about this in the article. It's literally the funniest interview I've ever had in my life, because he was the guy who finally said, "You're not qualified for this." I mean, he just flat out came out and said that. But here's the thing, though. Usually, as opposed to the guy who called me a blockchain lightweight, fuck that guy. He was just very negative. This guy, and I knew he was between. I'll explain. I'll explain the ending, then I'll go into the detail.
Okay.
From his perspective, from a soft skills perspective, I was giving him every positive signal you could possibly see. Right. I was confident. I was passionate. I was interested in the problem. I had a deep technical background. I learned. I self-taught a lot. Everything was going green light, green light, green light, green light. So soft skills wise, stuff you couldn't see on the resume, I was nothing but green lights. Resume wise, I was about as big of a red light as you could get.
Right.
And he kept and that's the thing. If I went into that job and I failed at the position, reasonable thing to happen here, because this is very, very, very tough position. You know, it's a research position. I needed to be qualified. He wasn't know if I could do that. That'd be very hard to explain to anyone else. I'm thinking, so you hired a kid who just has a bachelor's degree, and not even in a technical thing. He had a fucking business degree, which might as well be, a certificate from Chuck E. Cheese, basically, for being the best basketball dunker for as good as it did in this role. And he, do that. It'd be hard to justify. And he kept switching between those two. He asked me a question about blockchain, which I felt like I was answering, but not to the level he thought was good. And then saying, "You're one of the best candidates we've ever interviewed." And he would literally flip mid-sentence from sentiment to sentiment. And I could see him struggling. He was physically uncomfortable during the meeting because he didn't know what to do. And what made it worse is the manager was looking there and he was like, "This guy can do it. Give him a chance. Like he can make that." So the manager was 100% in background. And that's when it kind of broke the illusion of what they were looking for. And it took me several recruiter calls, manager position, talking to the peer to finally get to what I was doing there. They saw I had a technical background and they saw I built MVPs. They didn't know they needed that sort of individual, but as soon as I dropped into their lap, they saw this is somebody who understands the technical enough that they can go and start translating, but they can also talk to the developers. Build an MVP, build it out, make it functional, make it work, and then bring it to a development team that then can go and say, "Here's what we're building. Here's how we need to make it work. Here's the details there." It was really, really greenfield applications, because the development teams just were more used to building to spec. They weren't used to greenfield applications versus with me, I do. I did. I built a lot of those, and I was very comfortable in that uncertainty and that early on. That's what the manager saw. So by the end, the guy, the big boss, wasn't certain. And I got done and I left, and the manager was there, and I thought I didn't know what was going to happen. And at that time, and at that time, I had already gotten an offer from IBM. And so, or not an offer from IBM, but I got to the final interview with IBM. And so very quickly after that, I had an offer from IBM. I evaluated it and I said, there. And here's what happened. And this is the part I didn't get to explain in the article. I had an offer from IBM. Salary was right. I loved my manager. The people, it seemed like a good team. And all those inclinations ended up being correct. I mean, that's the thing. Right. It was the right decision by all metrics. But I had this other job and they didn't make me an offer. They gave me "we want to talk to you again." So for me, I said, okay,
I see.
The reason why they want to talk to me again is because they want to hire me, but they're trying to find a position. I was a good cultural fit, but not a good role fit.
Yep.
So basically I said, well, look, I have an offer in hand from IBM, and that's all I need, because now I need to because I'm moving to Raleigh. So now I need to pack up the house. I need to move to Raleigh. I need to get started, do this. Look, take the offer in hand. I'll figure it out later. So I accepted the IBM offer and took it back. So anywho, I get an email from a recruiter that says, "I need to talk to you." And I'm literally in line at the Jungle Cruise at Disney. I'm at Disney there, and I'm getting this thing there that the guy needs to talk to me. So I'm like, "Oh, okay, this is weird, but I need to do that." So get back to the hotel room an hour later, get a call, and he says, "Hey, Brian, looks like you turned down my offer, our offer." And I'm like, "I'm sorry, offer?" And he said, "Yeah, offer." I said, nothing about that email's okay. Yeah, send it over, there, whatever.
Right.
He sent it over and I look at it. Biggest salary, best title I've ever had, super prestigious organization, and it was AI data scientist. And I'm just sat there looking at this like, are you kidding me? Like what happened there? So, I mean, I really had to sit there and think about it, because it's like, this was making significantly more than I would be in the IBM role.
Right.
And I did that, and like, there's a lot of good stuff there. But so I sat back and basically, I could have rescinded the IBM offer. That happens all the time, you know. And
Yeah, I want to know your decision making in this. Like,
right,
this
right.
is critical, I think.
All right. So here's the decisions I had to make here. So for me, salary wasn't a huge deal for me. I've never negotiated hard. And the truth is that especially for big organizations, that's always proved out to be true. Your salary is much, much more on rails than you'd like to think, particularly as a developer and an individual contributor. As you get to be an executive, you have to start playing that game more. And again, you'll have help with that. You should go find a recruiter who's working for you, or a lawyer or an attorney or whoever, to basically negotiate on your behalf. But it's kind of on rails. Now, as a manager, I see that, where it's like, look, let me put it this way. Every single one of my guys on my team, basically their salary, I know what their raise is going to look like. I know everything that's there, regardless of performance or anything there. They're just, it's really on rails. So that wasn't a big threat, but big idea. But here, what is for me? One, transferable skills. That was the big one that I looked at, where it's like, which one of these positions am I going to be able to come out and do something with? Because I know my career at that point. I was jumping from company in different positions at different places. I had just taken off 15 months to basically do something else. And I ended up going from being a writer to speaking to starting an incubator to a company to a whole bunch of stuff. So it's like, look, there's a chance in a year I might want to leave IBM. So which of these gives me better transferability? DevOps, you know, IBM, or I'm sorry, the research data scientist is a really cool position. That's really cool.
It is.
But that's a very, there's not a lot of positions in the world like that.
Right.
There's very few organizations that can do that. And this was a place that was literally, I was going to be studying papers to basically go and get knowledge in blockchain, these other places. Could that be useful? Yeah, absolutely. It could be. But then I was moving into another position called DevOps engineer. Now, let me put it this way. If being an AI researcher is, you know, if I work at it, I can get it. Being a DevOps engineer is like literally, I literally could leave tomorrow and have a job the next day. It is so in demand. It is absolutely nuts. And even back then, I knew that to be the case, you know, or at least that, you know, that would be kind of there. Right now, I mean, literally, now being on the other side as a manager, I can't hire enough of these good folks, you know, that's why I love boot campers, because it's like, hey, I have a process where I can teach you. We have a really good process to do that. So we're going to find people we can train, find the cultural fit and the bare minimum technical, and we're going to train you on this stuff. And that ends up being a great model for us. It works for us, you know, and what we do. Not every position's like that, but this one is. So that was the one where it's like, okay, great. This is a really good thing. So transferability was one thing. The next thing was resistance to being let go, basically, or how likely would a downturn in the economy be able to affect that? And of course, that really didn't play out, right? Because we've been super stable over the last 3 years with no big major occurrences there. So really, you know, not really a big consideration. But anywho, I looked at it and it's like, okay, senior AI data scientist, you're in research, you're in speculative part of the company. You know, if you look at it and you're thinking through, it's wartime, where are we going to cut?
Yeah.
You're going to cut from research. That's just an area that it's like, you know, some companies won't, you know, to do that, but particularly that's where it's going to be easiest to do that, where it's basically like, look, this project doesn't make sense. You may not cut the resources like completely, but you may cut the project. And then their team might go and say, Brian, we love you, but we just can't support your salary anymore, you know, right? So you're going to have to go. So that I didn't want to be in that position. Versus DevOps in operations, it's like, man, let me tell you, that's like cutting off the pacemaker, man. Like it's just, it's the last thing that you would cut. No one's going to do that and make that happen. So that was the next thing. Yeah, that was the next thing. And then I really thought of the third thing, how flexible was the role? Like how much could it really change? And when I went to talk to my manager at IBM, and they were true to this too, like this wasn't BS, was okay, you could come in as a DevOps engineer and you might be a program manager next year. You might be a project manager. You might move divisions. You might network elsewhere. You might be a manager. You might be this. And says, basically, we don't know where, I don't know where I'm going to be. You don't know, I don't know where my boss is going to be. I don't know where the division is. There's a lot of movement. And so for me, that flexibility made sense. Versus in the research position, it's like there was one job I was there to do, and literally one. because it wasn't like I was a good technical hire that could fit into lots of positions. There was one thing I was intending to do, and if I didn't do that well, or I got bored and wanted to do something else, there wasn't an easy path to move elsewhere, or at least it didn't seem like that from the outside. So from a flexibility position, IBM won in that particular case. So in all three of those instances, with the flexibility, how much I got, my ability to get let go, and how likely that was, and as far as transferability of those skills to other organizations, it just made sense. So for me, it's like, yeah, it makes sense to do this. So even with an amazing offer like that, it matched up better with what I wanted out of my life. And the truth is, it made sense. My salary jumped up almost overnight, basically, with IBM, because so like I very quickly caught up to whatever I would have been making at this other organization. I had probably 8 separate roles in the first 2 years of my job. I grew between, and that's the thing. Like I looked at the list and how my manager described me, and he could not make it less than 8 things, to do that. And I was within 2.5 years, I was already promoted to manager, of the group, and I took that. So it ended up being 100% the right decision. But still, that story just kind of told me, it's like, man, if this can work out, like even if this is lucky, and it definitely was. There's something I don't understand about this process. If this is possible, it's the exception that kind of told me a lot of the rules of what to do there. And that influences a lot of my philosophy of how boot campers should think about how they apply, how somebody moving jobs should think about it, how you should approach building new skill sets along the way. Because a lot of the things that they found attractive about my background was not the primary stuff I did, though that was important. It was the secondary stuff on there and how I built MVPs, which was not a primary thing they found, but it was a thing they pulled out and said, "You're useful. We want to talk to you."
Right.
So that's it. So anywho, that's the story. So
that's amazing. Like from what I get, and tell me if I'm wrong here, you're not a gambling man.
Not particular. I mean, I'm becoming more. I mean, that's the thing.
On your bets.
Yeah, that's I think. Thinking in bets over time, where it's like, look, you don't attack the foundation. You don't go after that. You save the foundation. There's certain things you're very risky to. You're very fragile to, right? Finances, health, relationships. Those are things that can destroy you and do that. And so I don't screw with that. But as I start looking at my other activities in my life, I'm starting to think more in bets with them, where it's like, okay, look, I'm going to take a bet on this additional thing. I'm going to do this thing. And really, that's the whole micro experience framework is designed to allow you to do that and then to capture something concrete at the end of it. So you're always kind of building on on your foundation to do that. I mean, like, this was kind of, I built this experience organically, and there was lots of things that made me attractive to this organization as an AI scientist. But I also have the experience where I basically built stuff on my Echo, for a year, for like a few months actually. But I capstoned it. I put my experiences online. People could download my app, and then a year later, I was getting hired as a serverless architect in New York because of that one experience. Other stuff was important, but that's the thing that they saw that went, "You're useful, let me pull me out." So that's where I'm still taking bets now. Shoe staring is a bet. I want to start a Web3 school with a friend of mine in the area. That's a bet that I'm taking, to work in that. And again, if it fails, it fails. That's fine. But if it succeeds, that could also be, it could change your life.
It could be really good. Yeah. No, I love that. Like I kind of think of the same thing a lot. I know in our last talk we kind of talked a little bit about it, but I talk a lot about probability and things like that. And a lot of my decisions are based around thinking about probable outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think another thing that I've kind of thought about a lot, and this was more pre-boot camp, coming from the boot camp side, something I did read a lot about was thinking about bandwidth, like cognitive bandwidth. The idea of where your mental processes sort of tend to go and how you can actually free up space in your mind to accomplish or take on other types of bets. You can make more bets. So cognitive bandwidth can kind of range in a lot of different ways, right? So one for me was that I was in a source of sort of poverty, right? Poverty has this cognitive bandwidth effect on people, right? And I studied this a lot when I was kind of studying some of the psychology I was reading. in that it puts your mind in a different kind of framework, right? And you have to kind of enter survival modes.
You're right.
So your bandwidth is more focused on getting a next paycheck, not thinking about making a move today for that will pay off 2 years later, right?
Interesting.
So it changes the way you perceive sort of, and you react and you move within reality, right?
Interesting.
And that's what cognitive bandwidth is. So it changes. People think IQ is a number that is, if you were to pretend that it was actually accurate in the first place, people think that IQ is like a stable number, right? But actually it fluctuates,
Mm-hmm.
right? Due to cognitive bandwidth. If you're in a stressful time in your life, your IQ will actually drop, right?
Interesting.
If you have a child and you're a recent mother, it will tend to drop. And that's because your cognitive bandwidth is focused on someone else's needs and not your own.
Interesting.
So thinking about these kinds of things actually is where I sort of got into the idea of hacking. Now, some people, I think trendy people call it like life hacks, right? But
Right.
I think actually it's not that. It's actually just psychology. There's actually a materialistic sort of way to look at it and analyze it and actually get value from it. And like one of the things you talked about earlier was also another part that I kind of studied was the characteristic, a behavioral characteristic of curiosity.
Right.
And that behavioral characteristic specifically, if an individual has like high curiosity, is really what you're honestly looking for, right? Because that person is going to try something and they're either going to fail or they're not. But over lifetime, they're going to have more experience on failures or positive things over somebody who doesn't as much, right? And so over time, they've made more moves in different directions. So you're saying, for instance, you have this Schusterian kind of thing coming out, right? And you're kind of like, hey, I don't know if it's going to be positive. I don't know if it's going to fail. But the reality is you're going to learn no matter which way it goes. And
Mm-hmm.
it's going to put you in a better state than you were if you didn't do it to begin with.
That's
So
interesting.
and that is a lot of what I kind of studied. So coming from learning those kinds of things, learning about how we're already preconditioned and pre-programmed, right? Like I think I even might have mentioned it before, but you go to a bank and there's a sucker there, right? You go to a supermarket and they give your kid a sticker,
Right.
right? You know what I mean? That's a future customer. These are tendencies that we kind of build up over time, right? And I think all of these things kind of go hand in hand. And when we talk about making like future bets or gambles on what we can do later on, right? For me, this boot camp was one,
Hmm.
right? It was my bet that I placed, right? I came out of high school, I messed up. I took a bet and I got a CDL. Why? Right? For me, the reason back then was because you can get one in 3 weeks, right? You can remove yourself from poverty to a, sort of middle of the road kind of salary, 50 to 100K. Some guys make more if they own their own trucks, right?
Right.
But that was my first gamble. That was the first bet I placed. It was a safe bet. It was dangerous. Yes, I knew that it had those kinds of things, but what would it do? Well, it would free up bandwidth. How so? Well, I have to find time, right? Time to do what? Well, I have to study. Okay, can I go to college? No. Trucking doesn't allow me to do that. So what do I have to do? I have to self-study. What am I going to study? Well, I'm going to study how to study. That's the best thing to study, right?
Interesting.
It's not even about learning how to do something specifically. It's learning how to learn the overall idea. It's about managing your bandwidth. It's about managing your thought processes. It's about managing your time and what you invested into, and then the bets that you take. How safe are they, right? And so in the truck, I then had the biggest gamble, which was, well, I'm going to drop down to part-time. And right, well, I'll also say, I can't forget this, my wife, she's extremely important, right?
Right.
That's bandwidth. That's bandwidth. That helps you. If you have an amazing person helping you through whatever process you're going through and they're supportive of that, right? Then that just feeds into what you're doing. So a lot of it couldn't have been done without her.
Mm-hmm.
But simply getting into that boot camp, that was the gamble I played, and it paid off. I
Right.
knew that it was going to be a gamble, but I knew as soon as I hit it, I had to understand what I was getting myself into.
Which
Right?
is interesting because the way you're talking about this is that you're not really talking we're kind of talking about money, but not really. You're almost talking about the bandwidth, mental
Yes,
load on yourself. That's the judge you were using to say, is this increasing my bandwidth or not? And what is the bet I
exactly.
can do to try to take advantage of that? And it seems to be paying off. You seem to be expanding that bandwidth and giving yourself more time to focus on, well, other areas and topics.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. It allows me to focus on areas that I was unable to previously because I was caught up thinking about other things that I had to prioritize first.
Right, right. Interesting. Now, coming to bandwidth, I'm actually, or mental bandwidth, I'm thinking about that. I'm now in the process of implementing a new task management system, I guess you say there. I imagine, have you read David Allen's Getting Things Done?
I've actually read about 3/4 of that book. It's amazing. My boss, shout out to John Boker, that was one of the books that he made me on board with. That and he recommended Range. I haven't gotten around to that. I also read
I've been reading that book. I love it.
I've heard, and I've actually heard people say that I would be like a really good. I would love Range,
You
but
would.
yeah, I've been reading a lot about that, and it's interesting because it shows me a lot of the things that I've been interested in,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of breaks it down in a more pragmatic kind of way,
It
if that
is.
makes sense.
It is.
You know,
Yeah, I
go
mean
ahead.
the way I like what I like about the process of what he sets up is that I think he's a little bit too like he if he's very he's very, this is the way it's going to be, and its age is
Yes,
definitely showing. It's 30 years old and it's still kind of
right.
prioritized paper first. However, I've complemented that with watching YouTube videos of people using particular tools. Like I complemented Getting Things Done and Notion. That's the tool that I've
Okay,
implemented
yeah.
the system in, and it basically has just freed up my mind for my personal stuff in a way that's just amazing. Like if I need to come
Mhm.
up with something, throw down my inbox, get it all in there, and then just go back to the discussion. It's really easy and simple. I'm now switching over my IBM stuff, but it's funny. It's like that. I guess for me, what I'm really doing at the end of the day is I'm trying to free up my mental energy to stop being worried about my tasks and my projects
Yes.
because it's set up someplace else, which means it's free to explore these other problems, these other things that I need to be concerned about. It's interesting. It's interesting.
Absolutely no. I think well, and it's kind of even like John's kind of been coaching me a lot on this, right? Like some of the things that I didn't really consider because I come from more of a blue collar side, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've never had to carry around a notepad
Mm-hmm.
unless like I don't know. It was usually a manifest, right?
Right.
So but now like the I'm getting into the practice of taking ideas or taking objectives that I need to meet within a certain given day and writing them down. And
Yeah.
that actually removes it out of my mind, right? That's what's great about Google, right? Like
Right.
I just have to be a really good query machine. I don't have to know all the answers. I'm not here to win a trivia match, right?
Right.
I'm here to be a researcher. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a bit different. So, but like being able to offload that onto a notepad and sort of have it there. I've actually been trying to practice this and getting better at it. It takes time. It's a skill set that you have to kind of get.
Yeah, and that's a really hard part for people to kind of conceptualize and get
Yeah.
how much you have to work at these things that are just setup, like how
Yeah.
hard it is to do this. Like I mean that right now I'm in the process of learning a new tool for my writing. Actually, it got recommended by Jan Koch, I think his last name, or Koch, is basically he started this school. He started this. Does virtual summits with list building school, and he actually started Virtual Summit Mastery, and that's actually the program I'm going to use to help launch my summit next year. I just signed up for it and I did
Awesome.
it. Interesting guy, but he actually wrote up about this tool called Jarvis Ai, which is basically a tool to help you write better. And it's one of the coolest tools I've ever used. I mean, you literally can type in a command, write a new topic based on what you read up above, and it'll write out topics. It'll read up bullet points. It's not perfect, but it's useful. But I've been writing with it, and I'm realizing that even though it knows a lot, it's kind of like I need to figure out how to work with the tool. It's
Right.
not just going to write it from the ground up there. Like I literally now have to relearn the tool. And that's actually teaching me a lot about AI, which is, you're not just going to be able to start implementing AI and solve these problems. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of issues that come up with with these approaches. You're not going to be able to find one AI and just slap it in and it's going to work. You're going to have to work in it, but in a different manner than you did before. It's a completely new discipline, which is not some sort of shallow learning. It is a deep foundational shift in how you're working. You know, your writing is not just, for me, my writing is just not my writing. It's my writing plus a machine that I can then pop stuff out of, but then also learning when do I want to take control versus when do I need to listen to the machine, because it knows better and that wisdom there. It's very complex. And even something as simple as like a project management tool, when it's really valuable and useful, it always takes more time than you'd like to, actually get it working.
Absolutely. And I think like even to kind of that's what got me interested in tech, right? Is it's actually this extension of our output. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of what I think, right? Like I'm a brain and I control a body, right? Which is basically this vehicle I drive around, and it senses different areas and it has different, right? Like output, like a mouth, and it takes input and all these different things. And it does. It's essentially a sensory machine.
Yeah, ghost in the machine.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of decisions on the background processes, and that's kind of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about bandwidth. But then the moment you interface, I remember moments of driving a truck, and that truck, I almost wasn't even driving my body. I was driving a truck, right? And so I would notice anything that was wrong with my semi-truck, right? Like, because I was so interconnected with it. And I think that that's where technology is really going, right? Is like that interface between that and then the feedback. Now, the interesting part about automation, and when we talk, more so AI, and we talk about the feedback that we get from the tech that we're interacting with, that sort of loop, that cycle, right? That interconnectivity between this interface and your interface and how that all kind of works together. That to me it's an amazing complex system. Like I think a lot of people talk about like, hey, how do you automate something? Or so they say, like, how do you make a peanut butter jelly sandwich, right? It's actually a far more complex thing than you think. I think the easier way is to describe it as like, have you ever reached for a cup and it's full of water and you didn't notice it, right? So, and guess what happens? You grip the cup and you accidentally drop it. It falls right out of your hand.
Right.
And then it splashes all over the table. Right. Why is that? Well, it's because your brain is a machine and it miscalculated the weight of the cup. So it didn't know the amount of grip that it should apply to the cup. Right. And so it slipped right out and then it splashed everywhere. And so that is an automated process that messed up. Right. It misjudged how much that is. And so like, I think that's really interesting when you think about all the intricacies that go into how something needs to be automated, which is just a simple task. And then artificial intelligence, something that takes that task, right, and applies it to many other small tasks, right? And then you kind of get, from my understanding at least, right, you get this complex output, right? And it's interesting. It's really interesting to me, sort of that interface between brain and machine and kind of where we're going with that.
Yeah. And that's actually taking me to another area because we're thinking about expanding bandwidth. So AI is one of those things. And I think one of the big features of AI is that it truly is about as much of a black box as you can get. Because we talk about black box applications today, but you ultimately get to somebody somewhere understands what goes into the black box, and somebody, basically a human, coded each line. Maybe not a human, maybe not a human that's elsewhere, but it did there. Versus today, we are truly getting black box AI applications where no human made a decision. The human decision was at a level above what the algorithm was doing, and then they made a decision. So there still is human feedback on how to make this work, and that's not going away anytime soon, I feel, at least that part. Where humans are will probably keep rising on the system there, but you're doing that, and I think that that's quite unique. But so there's bandwidth at the personal level, and I'll call it the centralized level, because AI is really a hyper centralized technology, and they're just by its nature. It allows you to do more work with less people. Jarvis Ai means that I don't really have to hire a copywriter anymore. That's somebody I was going to hire at some point. I don't really feel the need to do that, to make that happen. Now I can spend resources on things the AI can't do, like making good visuals and, hiring someone to help me with conferences, whatever it might be. So that's centralized there. And so that's really like one of my biggest hot takes, which is artificial intelligence is not a disruptive innovation. Because you look at the biggest companies in the world who are dealing with AI, and they're the companies that were the biggest companies in the world 10 years ago. Facebook, Google, Amazon, they basically onboard these things. Highly, highly innovative, new things. They're doing things in a different way, but it's not disrupting anything. It's just taking it to the next level.
An extension.
Right. Versus a truly disruptive innovation is, I think, one, Metaverse is, and two, blockchain. And the telltale sign is the leaders in those industries today have no parallel to an old industry at all there, basically. There's no extension. The top companies in virtual reality right now, let's see, Valve, which is not a major, was not a major. So you have Valve as a hardware company. You have HTC. You have Facebook, you have a few others. So there's some Microsoft. There's some players, but it's not universally like a group where it's like, here's this industry moving over. Those are hardware guys. On software, it's even more diverse. Let's see. I mean, let me go through the top VR games as I was looking through. You have Beat Saber, which is effectively a startup. You have the creators of Pavlov VR. You have the creators of VR. Oh, you love Pavlov?
Dude, you got to get on it with me, dude. Yes, I got Pavlov. I've got, dude, I play all of
what?
it.
Yeah. Oh my God. Okay. Well,
we got to get on it.
I guess
I'll die, but we can get on it.
Oh yeah, I would love to. Absolutely. So you have Pavlov, you have, Saints and Sinners, you have a few other games which are all star.
It's
even
amazing.
Rec Room, for example, is another one. These are all small guys. So it's like there's no parallel. These guys were not major players in gaming. They were not major players in some other company. There are new startups there, and blockchain is the exact same thing. You see some guys like in blockchain, you have companies like IBM jump in, and maybe JP Morgan, trying to do their thing.
Right.
But you see many more companies that have no relationship to the industry. They just enter in, and they seem odd players there. And so now you have decentralized, and I think as far as expanding bandwidth, that's an interesting lens. Maybe not the ultimately correct lens, but I think it's interesting. AI expands you personally, right? But it's a very centralizing force. Versus things like blockchain are decentralizing forces that are allowing us to kind of collaborate across groups. Much better. Like I'm reading a book right now by an author named Max Borders, and I know that because I'm now having a discussion with him on LinkedIn. I love finding I love finding authors that I can chat with. That is like my favorite thing. He wrote a book called The Social Singularity, and it really is almost like a manifesto on, well, where are these technologies going? And he talks about a lot of these decentralized technologies, internet, blockchain, etc. A lot of the organizational research that's come out, which is holacracy is one, reinventing organizations is another one, is huge, and how we're starting to get structures in organizations that it's something new. So have I had this discussion with you yet? Because this is one of my favorite subjects. Okay, great. Let me take you through the hierarchy here of organizational structure throughout history. And it comes straight from reinventing organizations. You go back to the old days of like pre-human, basically, or like humans first roam the earth. And we basically had what he called it the magenta organizations. You didn't really have leaders. You had basically groups that were kind of slowly collected together. There was nothing that even looked like a hierarchy. Nothing happened there. It was like, basically groups wandering apart here. And they're very harsh to say. Humans were basically a part of nature, and organized as well as any other group. There were very limited hierarchies. But then we kind of went through the first group, which is which is really like the first basic hierarchy, which is one individual or small group of individuals use force basically to help collect other people underneath them. So it could be somebody like, for example, who was the biggest, strongest, whatever, could actually then tell a bunch of other people, we're going to move in this manner together, and we're going to go take on this group, whatever, to do that.
Right.
And that actually was the first real type of organization, first hierarchies that humans had. And so this was kind of like, warlords basically, or gangs or that sort of territory. They really operate in this, and they called that red organizations, and under those sorts of organizations, you were able to get individuals working together. You were able to get basic security and protection, because if you couldn't protect yourself, but you submit yourself to that individual, you would live. Your folk would live. Life would be there. And so, life was there.
Bandwidth by mass.
Right. Yeah. Right. And did that. And that created one sort of organization. But then time sort of advanced, and they said, well, okay, problem is that the life was still very harsh underneath those sort of organizations. Somebody could come in. There was very little, division of labor and those sorts of things. You were basically all warriors is effectively the way. And you have these hierarchies. So they came up with the next organization structure, which is really amber organizations, which is, okay, you're going to work for this group, this warlord, but we're going to promise not to kill you. And they're going to have this fixed hierarchy, and you're going to have a fixed role, and you're going to have a place in this community. You're going to have this thing to go through. And so basically in the old hierarchy with warlords, you could be killed very easily. You could be, cast off. And, it was very tumultuous. If the old leader died or became weak, you led to a new person, a new order, and there wasn't a lot of stability. So these next set of organizations really that came together was you have a fixed hierarchy and you have a fixed role inside of those places. You're somebody, we're not going to kill you. You can go in there. We can start having money, and you can start having a place. You can have family and not have to worry about these things. There were still wars and conflicts, but within the society, you had some stability. These were the organizations that really built the first great human achievements. You think about, physical things like, the Great Pyramids, for example, the 7 wonders of the world, those sorts of things. You had fixed hierarchies and fixed roles within them that people could go through. You had kings, and you had the level underneath that made the world simple. And, a lot better than what we had before. That became the next hierarchy. That existed for many, many years. And you still see organizations that are like that today. Governments operate that way still in a lot of places. Catholic Church operates this way. Hierarchies are still there. So you still have examples of them. But then we started getting through, and as people in the fixed hierarchy came through, it's kind of like, well, you're kind of stuck. Like if you're a serf, you're born a serf, you die a serf. Your kids will be born a serf, die a serf, and went through there. And people accepted that. But then they thought, well, what if that didn't have to be the case? Like, what if there was somebody, in that lower group that actually had something the other groups needed? Leadership skills, strength, need these other things, or they could do that. That, the current structure could be seen as quite unjust and not good for society because there was an inefficiency. And so that created what they called orange organizations. I believe it's called orange. And basically it was, okay, fixed hierarchy, flexible roles. And this is really the first, probably one of the big innovations of capitalism, and really the first sort of organizations, whereas you could start at the bottom of the organization, and we're going to try to have the value of meritocracy, which is you can go, if you work hard, you could be the CEO of the organization, or certainly do a lot better than you were doing before. You go into the organization, you grow there. And so that ended up becoming the predominant way that corporations operated. You still see it's the prominent way every organization, most organization has. And so that had a lot of benefits. One, you still had a lot of the benefits of the previous era, where you had protection within the group, people weren't coming at you. But now all of a sudden, achievement could be something you could get. If you were born a lowly serf, that was all you could ever be. But if you wanted to be more in your life, you basically had to repress that feeling, repress that thing, or end up being an outcast in your organization, in your culture. Versus now, you could be someone that says, "Hey, I want to be the CEO." Great. We're going to teach you. We're going to train you. I'm going to believe in you. I'm going to pull you up. You can go and train and go through this, and you could actually achieve it. Just the mentality shift of believing, hey, I can be CEO of IBM, and people go, big goal, but let's see if we can make it happen, and believe that. Huge shift from the previous generations, which would tell you no. And the truth is, there is an overlap here. Old factory, structures, like you think back into the robber baron era, in the mid 1800s, more operated like that, where you had factories and you had managers and then you had corporate, was fixed. And like, I think of IBM being like one of the organizations that brought on this new structure. Maybe not the only one, but it would have been one of the ones in the Genesis.
Absolutely.
Right. And do that. So you can move up the hierarchy, you can move up this, and it's really achievement focused. Now we're kind of into what this guy's calling the Teal Organization. There's another type of organization called green, which are more like not-for-profits, and they're they call themselves a step forward. They're more like a step to the side because they get rid of a lot of the bad stuff these organizations have, but they don't retain enough of the good stuff. And you end up getting a lot of problems there, which is why
Right.
a lot of not-for-profits either look like orange organizations or are just totally dysfunctional because of that.
Right.
But a new sort of organization came out, which is what the book's written about, which are teal organizations. There's a lot to be written about them. I highly encourage you to read it because I think you would absolutely get out of it. But this is the big change. Flexible roles, flexible hierarchy. This is one of the key innovations. And there's certain things that have to happen within that organization to allow for that. Power has to be basically stripped out of the organization. Growing in the organization needs to be disconnected from power, needs to be disconnected from salary, needs to be disconnected for a lot of these things. All the examples we have of teal organizations, there are basically no roles except what the outside world needs. You're all called like, associate or something like that.
You're people, man.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You're just people that are working in this. There's no hierarchy. No one individual has power over another. Basically, the way you get things done is you say, I have a project. I have something that I think needs to happen there. And you go, great. You're going to go convince your peers you need it. Write up a proposal, get everyone around this, and do that. Build a team. You don't have a boss. You and I don't have a boss, basically. We work for somebody, but we're doing the best thing we do here. But if somebody else has something better and we decide, hey, this is going to change the company here, we don't have to worry about that because the person I'm reporting to doesn't have that. So do that. Again, do I have to have discussions? Yeah. I have to have a discussion about it because that's kind of a dick move to just leave a project. But at the same time, there is no ingrained authority in that structure. You're there because you want to. And so like you basically you have examples of organizations like in Europe basically where there's a famous nursing organization that runs 100% this way. Growing in the organization is more like becoming a coach rather than growing inside the organization. Again, power is kind of stripped away from all the internals of the organization. Valve operates a lot in this manner. They're a big organization that believes in this stuff. Zappos has transformed their organization to this and basically doing this. And so there's no bosses, there's no structure. But the way that this operates is that basically you create structures based on the needs of what the organization needs at that point. No manager is sitting on top creating them. They're kind of organically coming about. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Old organizations
with this where I think you're going to go with
right.
it.
Old LLCs are based on basically, or corporate structures are kind of based on the old structure where you centralize, a group there in power. But DAOs are built from the ground up exactly to support this sort of organization. We're starting to get to the first experiments with DAOs around these sorts of things, with governance, with rules, with systems. And if you read Holacracy, it makes it really clear how you would run those sorts of organizations and deal with that, which effectively it is people join the organization because they want it. You buy into it because you have beliefs. The structure of the organization is based on voting as a collective. In the direction you go into, you can join decentralized. You can remove yourself from it if you wish. Sell your stake, do whatever. To make that happen. The people who end up being leaders in the organizations, there are no bosses in the traditional sense, but there are cultural leaders that exist in the organization. People who have authority and then people listen to, and they go through. They can't force anything on the organization, so it's pure persuasion on the direction they have to go through. So you kind of have these two ways, because the benefit of these sorts of organizations, if you can get them to work, is you lose the grind of a fixed hierarchy. Which, boy, let me tell you, that can kill people who live within them. And honestly, the ones that operate the best operate as minimally as possible through that lens of the hierarchy. And the truth is, there is some point where you need enough hierarchy to make the organization work, but not too much to suffocate a lot of the things that you get benefits from. And a lot of organizations have just blown right through that. And it's kind of like back in the day when, if you try to leave, the tribe basically or whatever, and you're in fixed hierarchy, you're too good from where you come from. You forgot where you came from. You think you're good for this. Versus in the new org, IBM is like, you can be CEO. Hell, let me go figure it out. Right. We'll Same thing with this sort of thing. People and organizations kind of have to use these bullshit examples or it's your manager, it's your job to no, it doesn't. It has to be this way. Otherwise they tell their own version of a life lie basically to allow them to exist in this. When the truth is it does exist. We're just not smart enough today to figure it out. Most people, you have to be prepped into this mentality. You have to, like this. And that's the thing. Zappos is about as forward thinking of an organization as there's ever been in the world. And when they were already doing holacracy. So they're already doing a version of this thing. They moved to a full Teal organization. They lost 30% of their staff in 1 year. 30% of their staff in 1 year. This is not easy. And people are not ready for this transition. But I believe it's the future. And I believe DAOs are going to help facilitate that. So expanding bandwidth in 2 ways.
So like, and I think this is so interesting to me. Like, I recognize that a lot of people know it as like agile kind of system, as opposed to, or that's how some people would say it. Versus right.
Agile is the beginning of this. It's the
beginning.
Yeah, the beginning.
And to me, it's the very lowest layer that it begins at. But as it rises in complexity, you begin. To me, what you're talking about is an emergent organization.
Correct. Exactly. Okay. Emergent organization.
So emergent organizations are based off of that principle of emergence, right? Which is sort of this fundamental underlying, it's kind of like you said, it's kind of like a kernel, honestly. But I honestly think you talk about organizations throughout history, which is very true, especially when you're talking about social structures like ants or humans and things like that. But I think about even all life forms. And let's just say, hypothetically, right, a long time, predate human, there were many different types of life forms. We as a life, as a species, right, not just us, but we as organisms have tried many different avenues of success within this environment here, right? So ants, humans, T-Rex, right? There's so many different ways that life has tried to be successful. And it uses many different variables, right? And it's all based off of emergence, actually. It's sort of this characteristic that if something's successful, it breeds more and it reproduces and it continues and it continues and it continues. And we, built these structures. We built these social structures. Ants did. They make up 20% of all body mass on this earth, right? Tardigrades, right, actually are... They kind of own this place, right? Huh. There's a lot of animals. They're not as social, but most successful species are social. And the reason why is because they actually live emergent properties. They kind of replicate it in a sort of way and I think oftentimes we think a lot about, right, like ourselves as a singular unit, not us as a mass, right? And what we're kind of moving towards. And I think what you're describing is exactly what we're moving towards. We're not going to go to an organization, I think, one day, hypothetically, where anyone's a boss. It's just, this guy's best for this project. This guy's best for this project. He's a natural leader. We all kind of like him to be our leader. We all respect him. So we listen to what he says, right? And he's directed us in the right ways before.
Yeah.
So that is sort of this emergent kind of behavior where people collectively kind of like, hey, I have this project that I'm really interested in and I would like to get everybody on board with, kind of like you're saying. And everybody's like, yeah, you know what? Let's do that, right? You're going to be the one to take it on, right? You lead us through, kind of show us that way.
Oh, yeah. And honestly, that aspect you're describing is exactly what organizational restructurings are intended to do. Mm-hmm. But they're trying to do it in a way that they can control.
It's controlled. And it's not allowed to naturally take hold. Right.
Because here's the thing. It's almost like, there's this interesting phenomenon that happens in organization. So, anywho, you find certain brilliant individuals. And again, like, I'm not sure if you ever read the book, The Innovators. It's by Walter Isaacson, basically. In the book, basically, he has this thing. There's a debate between the individuals who are innovators and the groups that are behind them and build them, both are important. I'm decidedly on the side of the innovators. Schusterian Careers is about the innovators and the individual, even to a fault. But it's kind of like you find a brilliant individual in the team. I fortunately have many for them working for me. And so I try to find the right place for them. They get so good at their thing. And it's like, we need to go and we need to expand you to go through and do this. So I said, we go and create a role for this particular individual inside of an organization to get the whatever result. Isra, one of my mentees at the organization. She was looking for a new role. I needed a product owner, and I didn't have one. Even just somebody who could come up with good business cases. I didn't have any of that. So we kind of invented this role for her. And it's like, we don't really know what happens. We're not sure what's going on here, but we're going to try it out. I'm flexible. She's flexible. And so like, that's what we played around with. And so it's been really good. So good that it's kind of like, okay, this is a new role now. We need this. It's done so much good to make this happen. So let's say, for example, she leaves the organization, or I leave the organization, or something else is there. We write down all our documentation. You knew all this, and you go and say, okay, well, here's the structure of the organization. We want to get the same results we got before. So now we're going to force a structure in this thing, because that's all we know about this organization and what we do here. And now I'm going to put new people into those places.
Right.
The problem is that the sort of organization I built inside of here is very different than what somebody else is going to do. Somebody's mind is going to think very differently. You're going to have evidence of the old structure there. Like, I've adopted things because of my past manager, James Skeen, and this is kind of the extension. Now we're into Schuster's organization and the way that it's structured there. But somebody who wants to try to control this says, I want the same result here, so I need you all in these roles and going to do these things, and they don't fit because you have different people with different skills and what you go through. And so you kind of create those, which is why Scrum teams end up doing a lot better, because instead of trying to force a structure on it, you basically go and say, here is this collection of people that are working together, this amorphous blob that is the team. I don't really know what the inside of it looks like, but here are the problems you're resolving, or here are the problems I'm told you're supposed to solve. So I'm going to start handing them to you, and then it's up to the team to go and figure that out. In a small scale, you can do this. The problem is you get to bigger and bigger scales.
Yes.
All of a sudden, it stops being. You start running into issues with that, and and the top-down approach starts to be very, very damaging to the organization and very hard to deal with. Very hard to deal with.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I think it's interesting because what kind of led me into like getting into this stuff was emergence, the theory of that. I was kind of, like I'd said before, I was studying complexity theory, and that was obviously something you have to kind of learn about in order to really kind of understand it. And then there's chaos theory, and then understanding the difference between the two, right? And then understanding the difference between random, or what it means to be truly random, and that we don't really have, and you cannot prove that randomness exists, right? Because you would need infinite information in order to, you'd have to build something that would have to replicate that, right? Otherwise, it's just chaos. All we can really do currently is set up chaotic algorithms. It uses what we currently understand. And so emergence, the interesting thing about it in theory is that the moment you begin to try to discover it, right, or try to understand it, is the moment you've moved its goalpost, right? Because you're doing emergence when you're doing it. It's kind of like, it's like that thing that you can peel back every layer and try to look at, and you know it's there, but you're never going to get it because you are a part of its property, right? You cannot discover it. It's not really a thing. It's sort of just moves, right? And so that's kind of what I learned, right? Is that there's actually no such thing, as far as we can tell currently, as random. The notion of something being truly random. There is chaos. There's not randomness. So with that in mind, I live my life, and we kind of talked a lot about it at the beginning, like through probability, probable outcomes. I think a lot about how to make it. I don't want to be the smartest guy in the room. I want to be the most probable to be there. Right?
Interesting.
I don't care to be the smartest guy in the room. I don't care to be, right? I just want to be the most probable of being there, and being in some kind of way, I'm there and I'm a part of this, right? And that's really what that's what I've been studying a lot about. And I think actually I've been trying to replicate it, right? I've been trying to do it under the hood, so to speak. This is actually where my passion really is. It's these little life hacks, it's these little ways of reading a room, understanding different behaviors when somebody does this, right? Like how to analyze that truly. What does this mean? You know, all these different things. And it's a lot. It's really stressful to try to maintain all these variables because it's a lot. And you can never actually get an accurate model because I'm a human. I can only have so much bandwidth. I'm only capable of reading so much. But just the notion that someone's a little bit slightly more aware of its presence gives them an advantage over someone who doesn't.
Yeah, interesting. Now you're getting into interesting ideas behind game theory.
Yeah, so game theory
Yeah.
does feed into that.
Yeah, a
Okay,
lot.
absolutely, a lot. And I played Magic the Gathering,
Yeah.
right? And by far the most complex game in board games, right? It is Turing complete in 60 cards, right? It's pretty cool. It's a really great game.
Oh, wow.
It is. There's actually a Turing complete 60 card deck that you can play. No, it's not competitive. Okay. you will lose on turn 2 or 3 depending on what you go up against. But it's not meta, we'll say that. But it is available.
Interesting.
But it is actually Turing complete, and no, it cannot be solved. There's just too many variables. There's over probably by now 30,000 cards. And depending on how they're structured in any given deck and how there is just too much of a range. But what you're actually playing is a probability machine. How probable is it that this person has this kind of card in their deck? How probable is it that if I play this, what are they going to do? What's this type of behavior I'm looking for? What is all these different... there's so many variables that go into that, but it really trains you. Programmers, very much, are trained in the same way. Magic the Gathering was written by a mathematician who did base a lot of it, like the stack, for instance, off of programming, right? And that's why it's so complex. But it's a very interesting thing, and that's kind of what got me into computer science, obviously, is when you're studying the idea or the concept of randomness, you have to go to computer science because it's the best qualified machines to figure out or mechanism within reality to figure out whether it exists or not. Right.
Interesting.
But the problem is it's a quantum machine itself, right? It's built from quantum mechanics, just like everything else. So it is still ruled by some sort of structure. It is not random in its, configuration and anything else that you feed into it. And you would have to have a random amount of data in order to process whether something's truly random. And you cannot do that.
Right. Isn't that the concept between like pseudo random versus what we call true random?
True random. Right. And but this is something very interesting to me. This is something I spent a lot of time studying because I wanted to understand, did I actually have free will? Right.
Interesting.
That was one of the biggest things. Like, as soon as I dove into psychology and all that kind of stuff, I was like, hold up. Do I even have free will? And it's that's a whole thing, right? So I dove into, okay, well, what is randomness? Can something actually be random? Because if it can, then I could have possibly random acts that are not dictated, or I could maybe act on something without any kind of precursors to it, right? Or whatever the case is. But the truth is, I realized that's when I discovered emergence. That sort of everything is almost on these rails of success and failures, and based on throughout time itself, right? Like, it's not just like emergence didn't just start with organizations. It started with, to me, the beginning, right? Like the very beginning.
Right.
And so with that said, like, we are not here randomly. We're here because it was probable to occur. And that's the interesting, we're having this conversation because it was probable to occur. It's not because it was random. It's not luck. It's not karma. We know it is these things. We've always been aware of emergences, it's always been there, right? But we've never been able to really dial it in. And I think that we're getting to a point, especially when you talk about technologies and things like that, right? The interesting part to me is that I think that the brain is trying to figure out ways to escape its current vehicle, right? That's what I often think a lot of entertainment is based around. The brain is trying to get input or put its output into other devices and mechanisms other than itself, other than the thing that it resides in, which is this aquarium that we wear, right? So I think it's sort of like the brain it's interfacing. So when we talk about VR, this is exactly what it wants. When we talk about before VR, and we talk about PCs and input, keyboard and mouse, playing video games. That's what we're talking about. Before that, when we used to read books, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about these ways that the brain tries to find ways to escape its current condition or its current configuration. And it's constantly pushing that and pushing that. And I think eventually you're right, it will interface with the machine. Now, this machine, I don't think, will ever be what we are. AI will never be what we are,
No.
right? But I do think it will be highly specialized. I do think it can be successful on its own in the same way that an ant can,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not conducive to be conscious to be a successful species, right? You don't need it, actually. You just need to be able to communicate with other nodes. And you have to have a centralized sort of concept of where we want to go. Humans have that. Don't kill my neighbor. Don't do a lot of these different things, right? We have those central nodes, that centralized sort of rules that we all follow, and it dictates the way we sort of structure and live everything out. So, like, to me, when we're kind of talking about how organisms are or organizations are moving, I think it is. It's the same thing. It's that social structure actually going through an emergent state. And it's
Right.
always an emergent state. So, and yes, that end configuration where it can wind up could very well be kind of like what we're discussing.
I hope so.
It's just that it might take time to move there. And yes, maybe you don't need, the brilliant thing is maybe you don't need as many people because you have AI helping you out at work, right? So you have to lay off a few people. Right. Well, what did that do actually? Well, that actually opened up 3 other individuals' bandwidth to be applied somewhere else
Right.
in our civilization, right? That actually progresses us further. They're not caught up in the same process as 4 other people now. We actually can offload some of this bandwidth onto AI and expand that out, just like you would when you write down notes.
Oh, right. Because like, that's the thing. The constraint moves.
Yes.
You know, the constraint moves to someplace else. I mean, again, for me, the real mission of Schusterian careers, if I had to pick anything at this point, is really breaking this model of one experience cycle, which is not really real. But what I mean by one experience cycle is one one educational block in your life, followed by one working block, followed by one rest block, retirement block, right there, and death. One cycle. That doesn't work. That doesn't work because once you lay off somebody in a position and doing that, you get people who don't know how to fend for themselves, and it's kind of like, well, that's because they thought this was it, you know, and they took a big bet. Basically, it's taking one giant big bet that you're right. And hoping you're right, which is causing people suboptimal things there because you're choosing shit that is just not interesting. It's good because it'll bring you stability, and stability is important. You can't live life without a certain level of stability. But if that's all your life is about, you're running into another sort of problem, you know, another issue. And so for me, that's what micro experience is about. It's about taking that and saying, we're going to build up additional experiences, additional things, and drill you into these other patterns that allow you, that work with the world, that make you different. That if you lose a job, first off, if you lose a job, I don't think it's going to be your only job. That's one of my big bets in the next 10 to 20 years is that I think the growth of the fractional employee is just going to become so massive in software that I think it's just going to become the standard. Because the truth is that a lot of the shit you have a developer do in a job, it's just you're paying a ton of money for them. It's not always that interesting. And it's not focused on the biggest problem. That old control model just doesn't work, and developers are finding they have better options. I mean, that's the thing. As soon as you get a couple years in a job, you're all of a sudden a very, very hot commodity. Very hot. Right. And so you're doing that. And so, like, I mean, like, one individual that I've spoken with basically said they went from being a full-time employee, I think he was C-level, but high up in the organization, small business, but still high up, to fractionalizing their time, and they make about triple what they made.
Right.
You can't compete against that. Healthcare, benefits, whatever, you don't have that. And we're already trending in that direction where people are being let go faster and people are leaving faster than they've ever done before. This cycle is just getting tighter and tighter. And not to mention that technology is advancing as rapidly as it's ever been, if not accelerating, where it's like most of the people that I hire don't learn the technologies I need them to learn in a school or a classroom. They're not even, mostly Udemy. I mean, literally, I had no, I'm not joking, where I had one of my top engineers, he's literally the top guy that works for me right now, who's literally said, I'm reading the Udemy course to learn about this thing, and I'm going to bring that knowledge back to the team and figure out how to do this. And it's 100% legitimate.
It works.
Yeah. It's a mod.
He's learning how to learn. That's it.
Right. Right. So it's only a matter of time where it's like, guess what? Instead of making it, you're going to work smaller, shorter engagements. You're going to have less time in that. And then you can make a decision on why you want to use this. Do you want to use do you want a 4-hour work week? Okay, go make it work. Do you want to work for a few companies and make a ton of money? Go make that work there. Just the only thing that might change that is if you're interested in growing in an organization and being CEO in a traditional organization, that you need to be within an organization, that you need that. But if you don't care and you're just looking to get paid and you're not interested in the power and you're doing that, the options are extraordinary on your own, but it does require a different skill set. This idea of the antisocial developer is going to die.
Yes.
You cannot survive in a free market if you can't communicate what you have there. There will be ranges. There will be more. There will be more communicative developers and less. But this idea of you can just be a hermit and you can just sit in your room and do nothing without having some interface to the outside world just can't survive in this environment. It can't.
I think that's a great point. And even though I'm not a developer and I'm not going to speak to develop, I think actually that's just period. That's just a truth. Mm-hmm. And that's a socialized truth, right? Like for humans, especially, you could be the smartest guy in the room, but if you have zero output on the group, no one's aware of it.
Yeah. It
doesn't matter.
Yeah. And that's the thing. You can be very intelligent. And that's the thing. Let me tell you, especially in my time in the blockchain space, these guys are weird, man. They are a weirdo. Like these guys are just nuts. Where it's like, awesome. Man, let me tell you, Ayn Rand would think these guys were taking a little bit too far. I mean, like just some of the beliefs they have and what they do there. But let me tell you, they are getting out there. They're communicating. You have to learn to communicate through some. Now, it doesn't mean you have to be a Schuster where you're going out there and you enjoy speaking and doing that. You're not forced an extrovert, but you need to understand how to write. When you need to understand how to speak or do something. Like, you think of Satoshi Nakamoto or whatever, basically never gave a talk or speech or anything, but learned to communicate through writing and change the world because of it. That's the sort of thing where it's like you have to find a medium to make this work, and you do that. So you have to pick up some skill. Like that was, I gave a talk to Code Academy, one of the Indian chapters, and that was my number one lesson to them is if you get out to the real world, you need to make communication a top level priority of what you learn. Maybe it's the same. Maybe it's video. Maybe it's speaking. Maybe it's writing. Maybe it's just writing good documentation. Maybe you don't write in social media, but you learn to write internal memos and documentation. But you have to make it a top level priority because the direction we're moving is where that's all you're going to have the ability to do.
Absolutely.
That's all you're going to have.
I think if you can leverage multiple of those, even better. Right.
Oh yeah. I mean,
more streams of output, you know, it really is. It's output. You have to interface with your environment, not just your cell phone.
Oh yeah.
Right. Like you can use the cell phone to interface with other people,
right? But
you can use many different ways to reach people. I know, for instance, I'm not the greatest writer, right? But I don't mind getting on a podcast and talking. You know what I mean? Right. I don't care. It's just, and I'm not the smartest guy in the room, obviously, but I like being here and I like being a part of the conversation. But one of the big things, I think that is just the best advice you can give anyone for any boot camp, Code Academy, or wherever you're coming from. Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah. I mean, figuring out the communication and figuring out how to do that is good. And that's the thing. It all of a sudden opens so many more options. Because that's the thing. People feel stuck because they feel like it's almost like here's a train, it's getting on the rails, and now it's like you're forcing the train onto a new single path. It's like you still have the old mentality, right? 20 years, and it's like I fucked up because I'm now 2 years out of school and I do that. You're still on the single track mentality. Versus if you see it as smaller, tighter circles that you can do where you can get many different cycles, many different lifetimes, and you see that not only as acceptable but desirable, all of a sudden you get a lot of interesting ideas where all of a sudden these either ors people have put in their head and thinking, God, should I be like a writer or a developer? Or should I go into AI and this? And it's kind of like, well, study all of them, multiple,
All of them.
like, you know,
Yeah.
go through and do that. Start seeing what
Just
pulls you out. You know,
yeah.
and that's really it. And honestly, maybe this is something where as I go into Schusterian careers deeper, really honing in on this, you know, there, maybe revamping my model. It's really is that, look, education, networking, and opportunity, and actually getting it down. Those are all good. But as long as they are actually turning themselves into data, concrete things that then you can put down on paper, share with others, and survives beyond you, it's something that will it's something that will have impact in the world. The problem with just studying random things and not finding any way to put it in your background or doing that or not capstone it is the fact that it's like it's basically just wasted potential. How if you're exploring, that's an entirely different matter. It's an entirely different thing. But if you get to a point where you're like, I like this and I want people to know about this, which should be your default. The opposite should be where it's like, nah, I don't want. There should be a good reason why no one should know you're getting into that, you know, maybe right. Or maybe it's like, you know, there's a reputational harm or something like that. But your default should be, it should go there, which is like, okay, I went into got education. Let's get a certification for this and put this out someplace. I'm going to network to this group. Hey, let me start writing to that group. Let me put stuff in Twitter. Let me put stuff in this, something that persists beyond me, and do this. Write a blog post about it, whatever. Hey, I got an experience. Let me find a good way to put that into a resume and put that experience on LinkedIn and where I can talk about it, that people know that it actually happened. You're constantly taking those and putting it into data because you can't decide what people are going to find useful. The two jobs that were kind of like the miracle positions, the one that I just told you about, and the one that was the job in New York, which is, again, it's why I chose this setting. It's like, this reminds me of getting coffee on one of the avenues, you know, in the Upper West Side, you know, or someplace in the city. And it's just this beautiful thing where it's like, I spent a year there working for A&E Media because I built things for my dumb Echo, and they were bad applications. They were not good applications. They were built in Node and were basic, but they functioned and they worked, and I capstoned them. You don't know what people are going to connect with. So I think if you do that, you can build up many, many, many more lifetimes of experiences, and then you get to choose the best one. You get to choose the best one. So, so doing that. So, okay, I'm going to pause here. So you didn't get a chance. So I'm going to pause because I need to get that idea down because that's a good thing here. But you now get to hear my my laptop, okay, or my keyboard. So anywho, this is my keyboard usually. Can you hear that?
Yeah, I can hear it.
Okay, many experiences when you do micro experiences. Okay, that's keyboard. Does that sound loud to you?
It's all right. I mean, it's mechanical. I can definitely tell.
Okay, it's mechanical. Okay, cool. Here, I don't have the solenoid on though. So here it is with the solenoid.
It's a little quieter, it sounds like. Oh, interesting. You still typing?
Yeah, I am. It may be blocking out the sound.
It might be. Yeah,
so
I think so.
That honestly, I get told to shut off my keyboard when it does the previous version. I'm glad it's limiting it because that means there might be noise canceling, which means I don't have to mute myself every time, which is really good. But I basically am a keyboard fanatic, and I get loud, heavy keyboards. This one is based off of the IBM Model F keyboard from the 1970s.
Nice.
Yeah, it's from
old school.
Oh yeah, it is old school and it is beautiful. Let me actually go.
Is it a Leopold? What are those called?
No. It is a completely custom, beautiful. This guy actually, he's actually a huge fanatic. Let me actually message you here because we'll get back to the regularly scheduled programming. This guy actually
Let me see.
Loved the Model F keyboard. And that's the thing. Went out of production years ago. The company that owns the patents for it have only been making Model M's. And they're good keyboards. But they're not brilliant. This guy literally spent 5 years building up a Model F keyboard from the ground up. They are thick. They are heavy. They are clicky beam spring keyboards. It is expensive. It is literally the best keyboard I've ever owned in my life. I bought the solenoid. I made it there. Let me tell you, if you like old
Yes,
aesthetic, I promise you, I've been using this keyboard for over a year now.
Yeah.
I love it. It is the best thing I've ever done. He actually, and this is amazing, this guy actually has just announced a new project for an even older keyboard. So there's a beam spring keyboard. That's like literally, if you try to buy one on eBay right now, the old one, it costs $2,000. They are in high demand. And actually, here's the key. If you see it here, this, well, hold on, let me get it to my chest. It's this key here where you get this, basically this nice action. There are many parts that make up this beam spring keyboard, as opposed to the buckling spring.
Right.
And he's now launched a project there with an even bigger full-size keyboard, old style with that old spring in it. I'm buying it pretty much as soon as it comes out. I'm doing it.
That's amazing.
I'm not gonna see the keyboard until like 2026, but I'm gonna get it early.
You're gonna get it.
So that's why I would say Leopold is a good brand. My brother buys it. I also got, if you want a slightly cheaper keyboard, let me go to
right now all I've been using is the Steel series. I think it's 80%, and it's got red switches because I like to slam the keys. You know what I mean? I don't like resistance. I like to just slam the frame on it.
I 100% get it. So this other one that I did you is actually the Model F keyboard, and it's not a recreation. This is literally the same machining that make the original Model F keyboards from Unicomp, basically.
Wow.
IBM sold off Unicomp to, or sold off their keyboard division in the 90s, I believe, to it was Lenovo. That's it. And then this company that loved the keyboard spun off into Unicomp into basically in Lexington, Kentucky. So they literally make the keyboards a lot cheaper than the Model F one I just showed, but these are the original machining.
Yeah.
And they're still beautiful keyboards. They look
nice. Amazing. That looks great.
They are gorgeous and amazing there. But that's the thing. If you want to treat yourself, the Model F keyboard is like it's amazing. But if you're looking for something that is more reasonable, like again $100 or so, it's hard to do better than the Unicomp. That's an amazing keyboard. But Leopold is great, and you can get lots of keyboards. I just bought a hot swappable keyboard from Drop. Are you familiar with the company? Let's see.
I'm not sure.
It's
I hear a lot about like Ducky and
good one as well.
Yeah, Leopold and a few other brands. Well, I haven't heard some of these.
Well, this one here. Well, keep in mind, my manager, the one I referenced, James Skeen, fanatic about mechanical keyboards. He builds his own. Ooh. He actually built one of my keyboards for me. Really nice. He actually got me into this whole hobby and why I actually do it. And so he's into really small 60% and even 40% keyboards. They are light and they are silent, and he loves them. He does a great job with them. Me, I buy big, bulky, heavy, loud keyboards. So this one here, actually, this the Drop Control mechanical keyboard, it's a 10 keyless keyboard, so it doesn't have the keys on the side there, but they do have a variation of it that gives you the full size there. They're hot swappable, so you can buy your own switches, swap out, and put your own in to do what you want. To do that.
Different kits, different.
Yeah.
All the switches. Yeah, this looks really nice.
It's a very nice. So that's the thing. If you're interested in trying different styles or even different types of linear keys and you really get into it, this keyboard means you can swap them out, put in a new key set, put in a new style, and it'll function just fine. So this is my wife's Christmas present to me. I told her exactly what to buy me.
This is really nice.
Yeah. It's a good one. So for Christmas, this is one to consider as well. It's a beautiful keyboard and key set.
I love it. I love all the customization you can do to that one. That's really cool.
Yeah, and that's the thing. The Leopold and the Duckies, I bought those and I got them for my parents actually, and they loved it just as much.
Okay.
The Leopold is a nice brand. I really like them, and I like that style and look there.
A guy I worked with at the SOC had one, and I was like looking at it, and I just kind of typed on it a bit while he was gone, and I was like, "This is amazing." This is amazing.
Yeah, no, and there is so much to get into. Like if you get into the switches, like literally, you can follow group buys where some guy comes out with like a limited set of switches where it's you can get particular tactileness. You can make it clicky. You can make it linear. like there or whatever. I mean, the one that I know is really really popular right now is Holy Pandas actually. And so let me find you the website that I use for this.
Yeah.
Is it Novel Keys? That's it.
I'm
That's it.
bookmarking all these right now. These look.
Yeah. Here it is. If you want to do true customization, this site is about as good of a one as in Novel Keys. Yeah, they you can get all those things. So like if you get a hot swappable keyboard and you want to try out different styles, you can just buy a whole bunch of them. Like literally like the cheap cherry switches if you want to just try different variations. Like the one I heard was really really nice is the MX cherry yellows. Those are supposed to be very nice for that. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff too. Like I bought my wife a mechanical keyboard. She got just clicky blue switches on them, MX cherry blues, and they're clicky. But then I bought her a resin keycap of a dinosaur terrarium or whatever, and that's her escape key now. And she loves it. Awesome. It's great.
That is awesome. I've gotten the MX cherry. That's what I've got right now.
Yeah,
because it's zero resistance. I like it for gaming.
Really. Yeah, it's very. Those are very very good for that sort of purpose. Because that's the thing. Like I could like when I was into Warzone, I couldn't game on this keyboard here. There was just too much resistance. So I have a special keyboard specifically for Warzone that I use that is black switches, which is linear, a little bit more resistance, but you get that nice clean click and it's easy to do.
Yep. Yeah. Let's see. That's awesome. I didn't know you were into keyboards.
I'm very much into keyboards now. Let me put it this way. Like I really love them. And it's fun too because everyone who's into keyboards seems to have a different personality of how they're into keyboards. And if you really want to get into it, there's a YouTuber actually that I really really like. And he's kind of a good starting place. So let me look him up.
Something I got into. You want to check this out? Hang on.
Yeah.
You're gonna think this is interesting. I guarantee it. So currently they're in hibernation. Okay. Because I got to simulate the winter, but this is their typical contraption.
Oh, I can't see. It's the.
There we go. Maybe I can get it in front of my body.
What is that?
It's an ant form.
It's an ant. Wait. What do you mean competition?
Hang on. Let me see. I'll send you a link to them. No, it's not a competition. It's just something I got into as a hobby, is ant keeping, believe it or not. For a lot of the reasons we were kind of talking about. Hang on. I thought it would be really neat to kind of take... Here you go. Tar heel ants.
Tar heel ants?
Yeah. They have this guy, he hand makes all of these, and you can get them with like museum glass and all kinds of stuff.
Oh,
and they're really,
that is
really
so
nice.
Cool.
Yeah. Right now my ants are in the fridge right now for the winter time. But let's see.
That is so cool.
They're amazing. It's amazing. Yeah.
Oh my God. And hey, Raleigh, North Carolina.
This
guy lives down the street from me.
Actually, he's like right there. Shout out to them, man.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, I'm gonna put this in my list to look out.
They're a great little desk piece because you can kind of just take care of them, throw a little bit of food in there that you're eating on, maybe some bread, some fruit, some meat. Yeah, they're awesome.
Yeah, I'm gonna add this for my because again, I look for weird gifts for my brother. I either buy really geeky gifts or really weird gifts. Every year he found my gift, basically perfect gift. For this year, he's buying me A5 Wagyu steaks, which he does every year, which is amazing.
Never had one, but I've heard about it.
It's amazing. He buys it like super expensive, so it's like a once a year thing, and he often buys just something small. For me, for last year, I bought him a Quest, basically, for his headset there, so he could get into that. And this year, I sent him a 3D printer. Because it's one of those things where it's like, you know what, like, he could get really into this. And he's somebody that I could see loving this. So anyway, I got him there. But in the past, like, I've sent him like really weird pillows and like full thing cutouts of like Danny DeVito and shit like that. Right. So an Antiranium is like right up the alley where it's like, I don't know if he'll like that, but it's interesting, It's
interesting. Yeah.
So
I think they're really cool. They're really fun to observe. Like you can get different species. I recommend keeping. Well, I think you're supposed to keep ones that are local to you because ants they can go to war. Like if they get out of your house, you can cause a lot of problems.
Invasive species. Yeah, that makes sense.
So,
Yeah.
but certain ones you can get, and they keep livestock. Like they will. Some do agriculture. Some, all kinds of things.
Oh,
It's amazing.
that's very cool.
Yeah.
Oh man, yeah. Oh, right. The personalities with keyboard personalities or whatever, where it's like, yeah, where it's like between the three of us, James was into these really small keyboards, 40%. He actually did 40% keyboards where you had to get multiple layers to do this. He got very proficient at it. He would do orthogonal basically or whatever, ortho there basically, where instead of the keys being shifted, they were all in a line in a square. So he would actually do that and make that happen. And he would be very light, very silent, and he would lube them up so that they were perfect. He would buy really, really expensive switches. So this thing would end up being very expensive, but it was light. It sat in your lap, and like the key feel and sound was amazing. So he really took it to a whole nother level. Me, I usually don't do my own keyboards. I have one that I've been intending to build for a while now. That's a micro pad that I want to use with 3D modeling basically. But basically it's a hot swappable one, and it's a good micro pad. But for me, I like big, loud, and from like the 70s and 80s basically is the style I go for. Literally this keyboard in front of me is 10 pounds. It's just metal, and it's just this massive thing, and that's what I like. And so another guy, basically, Jake Wernett, who I used to work with, actually is into finding old Apple keyboards, fixing them up, and then rebuilding them basically there. But like you find some people where they like ergonomic split keyboards. This guy Ty, basically, who I just Tihash types basically is almost like the he's almost like the Bob Ross of keyboards, where he'll make like $3,000 keyboards for people.
Oh man, I mean, to be fair, it doesn't shock me, right? Because if you spend that much time interfacing with something, you need to make it
and that's the thing. It's not going to make you type faster. It's not going to do. But if you're somebody who like you want the exact experience you like, it's right, and it's your purchase. That's the thing. But some of these get into that. So anywho, he gets into like these super expensive keyboards and really gets into like key feel and things like that. He does a great job doing that. And then of course there's Reddit mechanical keyboards, which
yeah.
So anywho, if you're interested in just falling down the rabbit hole and just seeing what people actually do and buy, this is about the best place you can do. So good luck.
Let's see here. I'm interested.
They're just works of art at the end of the day. Some of them like.
Oh man, that is clean.
I know, man.
Wow. That's a rabbit hole. Oh my, how do you even?
Yeah.
Ooh.
But
okay, yeah.
What my favorite thing about this industry, it truly is small guys building things out of their house. They'll design boards, they'll design PCBs, they'll design switches. There's basically no huge players in this industry, at least on this level, the customized thing here. So you're really just buying from guys working out of their garage, people building PCBs and things like that. So the truth is, it's a bit, it can get expensive, but to get the exact keyboard you're looking for and what you want there, it's one of those things where it's like, James will basically buy group buys, won't see it for 2 years and do that. Just kind of something that's always going on in the background. So that's the thing. Like there are good brands out there. If you're interested in going, interested in saying, okay, well, what are good sites to start with? I kind of have the list to go through, but honestly, I mean, it's very cool.
It is very cool. I could spend a lot of time looking at this. Some of these just look satisfying. I don't even know how to make out what that is. The characters on that, the symbols.
Yep. The keycaps are their own thing basically that people get into.
I guess some people don't care for the reference.
No, they don't do that, or they have their owns that they go and print there, or they have different circle, they have different things that they want to do with it there. I mean, like the big thing are basically profiles, and the ones that I do, and it's actually, you see it here with the beam spring basically or whatever, where it's
Yeah.
got a very deep well and it kind of cradles your finger. That's a particular profile. So all my keycaps I buy have that particular profile because I like that. And I look for that, you know, and I like big letters that are easy to read, and I don't like the secondary references on it because I basically memorize my keyboard at this point
Right.
to do that. But yeah, there's just a ton of places that you can get into, and you can do pre-build, you can get into it. Oh, here's a guy who, yeah, this one's cool. This guy basically remodded, he fixed up an old Dell with Alp switches basically, so it looks like so it's like the old style like Model M look there.
Ooh. I love that off-white color
It's
and
pretty.
everything. That
And
looks good.
and that's the thing, you can find that. That's what's amazing. Like all
Right.
those old keyboards that you think, you can find
Yeah.
it. There are people reproducing it and building it. You may not get it in the time frame you like, but you can find it.
It's interesting you say that. I kind of went on a deep dive a little while ago to look for Apple IIs that had
Yeah.
been like redone and like or just like gutted, but like kind of what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say, like, yeah, redone. The internals are like
Right.
fresh. They went in, cleaned it up. If something was wrong with it, they replaced it. And then you turn it on and you just get that vintage look. I kind of
Mhm.
wanted to get one and then just start programming on it, like old school,
Oh
like
yeah. Oh yeah.
trying to write like maybe choose your own adventure kind of games and stuff like that.
Oh
Like,
yeah. Oh
I
yeah.
would love
No.
that.
Oh, and this is the best part about it. If you get into making your own PCBs and doing that, you can get into recoding your keyboard to do whatever you want. Like this actually here, I
Yeah.
use GMQ basically to go and do it. And that actually, to turn on and off the solenoid, you can make different layers to do different things. So if you have specific functions you want to build into your keyboard, you can go and do that.
I see.
And it's easy to do.
Kind of macro to it, basically.
Yeah, it's something
Okay.
very serious, very, very serious stuff to get into.
That is yeah, that's a rabbit hole. That's amazing.
That's the thing. I spent hours and hours people making custom keyboards and stuff like that. So anywho, it is fun. You're welcome. It's one of my favorite hobbies.
Thank you.
And it's funny too because nobody in my family before I got into this cared about mechanical keyboards, and not my wife, not my parents, not my brother, anyone.
Yeah.
And I think my wife summed it up best where she said, "I never thought I would have this much of an opinion on my keyboard." Because here's
Right.
what you don't realize: what happened is that as the keyboard got cheaper, as the computer got cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, the peripherals on it needed to come with it because not
Yep.
many people wanted to buy a keyboard with their computer. They just wanted to get it
Right.
all in one. So like back in the day, and this is something where it's truly there, the quality of keyboards have gone down significantly over time. It's truly is the best keyboards in the world, in my opinion, are being built now in places like this and in the 1970s. But here's the thing: in the 1970s, a computer cost $5,000 to $10,000. So you could spend $500 on the keyboard and make something actually
Right.
really, really nice. So that's
Right.
where you got really thick, really gone through. And then as time went on, as the computers got cheaper, so did the peripherals, including the keyboard. So it went from the beam spring keyboard, which is literally 20 pounds, and you had to sit on there, to Model Fs, where buckling spring was a cheaper version. It's considered like royalty today, but it was actually designed as a cheaper, simpler mechanism for the keyboard. Model F to Model M to other different variations to then basically you got to the MX cherry switches basically, which is what
Right.
the era we have today, which is even cheaper. Then we went to membrane because as the computer
Yeah.
got cheaper, we needed to get cheaper and cheaper. So now we're kind of in this area where it's almost like a generation of people have grown up with crappy membrane
Bad
keyboards
peripherals. Yeah.
and they just accept it as normal. And so like that was my whole family. And then I basically literally packed up all my keyboards that I owned, and I have, I don't know, probably 5 at this point now.
Right.
And I just did it. And I said, okay, just sit down and try this. And they start typing. I'm like, oh, huh. And they're playing around with it. They don't know what to think. And so like I literally over Christmas last year, I literally went online and bought them a Leopold, bought them a brand from Amazon. I brought my brother Tom a keyboard and say, here, try this out. And it's like, yeah, they said, I'll never use another keyboard other than this one and like the one that's on the Apple laptop for convenience,
Right.
and
Right.
do that. And And my wife now uses her clicky blue keyboard for everything. That's what she loves, doing. She's like, I'm never going to use anything else. It's the best.
That's awesome. That is awesome. I typically avoid the clickies just for the mic when I'm playing video games and things like that. I'm like, because otherwise it's like,
Yeah, I consider that my dominance play basically when I'm doing games or whatever, and doing that where it's like I'm here.
yeah, right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh
That's
man,
hilarious.
so right. So anywho, that's that rabbit hole. So, alrighty, we're getting about to be top of the second hour here. Is there any other subjects you want to chat before we're done for the day?
Oh, dude, I've had a good time, man. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, let's see.
Ask me something.
Oh, okay. Actually, how about this? How about this? We didn't talk. Okay, so we talked AI, we talked blockchain. Let's do Metaverse briefly.
Cool.
In the direction we're going through. So, what's been interesting with Meta, basically, as coming out of there, is that basically Facebook has tried to rebrand itself as a Metaverse organization.
Yep.
And honestly, my personal opinion is that I don't think Facebook or Meta will make the transition to the next era. I think it's going to be like the Bell Laboratories of this era, where a lot of the major innovations for this industry are going to come out of there. A lot of the thought leaders, the thought leaders are going to be former Meta employees who work the space, but I don't think Meta is going to make the jump. The reason why is one is that we're dealing with disruptive innovations. Yeah. And that by nature means that because a disruptive innovation is disruptive, not because of the technology itself. Again, AI is about as revolutionary as you could possibly get, but fits totally within the organization. It isn't disruptive versus, blockchain and, Meta is. Why? Right. Because it's not the technology itself or how incredible the technology is. It's the relationship of the technology to the customer base. So there's a book called The Innovator's Dilemma. Have you ever read it?
Nope.
It's got to hit your list. It is one of the best books that I've read to explain this phenomenon. And basically what they did is that this, Christensen looked at a lot of industries, but he found that discs showed it quickly because there's a lot of innovations that happened in the disc industry over the course of 30, 40 years, where you went from basically giant, many, many pound discs all the way down to flash drives. And pretty much every single time the format changes, the major players in the industry changed every single time. Had nothing to do with the level of technology, because there were innovations that were major innovations that significantly increased the size of the space, speed, everything you would think, but didn't change the industry. So the major players remained the major players. But what ended up happening is that, the transition from mainframe to microcomputers. Let's just talk about that. These guys, we thought, okay, did the old players sleep on the technology? No, they didn't. Right. As a matter of fact, some of the old players were actually the innovators. They were the first ones to develop the technologies that would end up being the thing in the next industry. They owned the patents, they did the groups, so they saw it. They just didn't see any value in it. Why? Because their customers didn't see any value of it. Their customers were mainframe customers. And mainframe customers, mainframe operations, mainframe usage, whatever, is very, very different from computers. Right. It's very different architectures, very different way of things. Their organization didn't support that. And so really the market was, so you couldn't sell to your existing customers, you had to make new customers. And the new customer space was so small, and this is key, so small and unattractive that the big company didn't see it worth pursuing. They didn't see it worth pursuing. So if you're a company that has $1 billion in revenue, the thing that is exciting to you is something that's going to move the needle. Let's call it 10% over the course of a year. But let's say it moves the needle. So a 1% opportunity, if you're $1 billion company, is a $10 million opportunity or something like that. Something that builds that level. Some of these early technologies in these industries could be orders for 100,000 units or $100,000 worth of units. Yep. And it's are we really good when our average deal size is $5 million? Are we really going to be interested in doing 50,000s? It's pittance. So they stop focusing on it. And so their customers, not them, their customers tell them, We don't care. Stop focusing on it. Serve us. But the problem is the industry changes. The technology gets better. It starts improving over time. And eventually, feature-wise, gets to a point where it overtakes the old features that, so that basically wherever you think of the list of features is for the organization, for the thing, speed, size, cost, whatever, the top level of what it can do, the disruptive innovation can do, but it starts off as way worse. Blockchain in the traditional financial industry is a great example if you're looking for something modern. But basically, over time, it gets better, better, better. And then there's a break-even point. Most of the companies say that when it hits the break-even point, then we'll move over. But here's the problem. By the time the technology moves over to breaks even, the industry players are set. They're no longer small companies. They're big companies. The market is set. The marketing is set. The operations of how to sell that thing is set. Ends up going through, and it ends up taking off. It's right at the point where it's starting to take off. So then the entrenched players try to move industries, but can't. And worse, their customers are saying, sorry, we're moving over to microcomputers, and well, you're not really a big microcomputer player. We're interested in the small upstart you were ignoring 5 years ago, and that side. And that happens over and over and over again, to do that. And that's a trend. Meta is trying to make a big transition over, but here's the big problem. The way they make money has nothing to do with how you make money in Metaverse. Here's the thing. How are people making money in Metaverse today? I mean, there's primarily 3 ways. Hardware sales, you're selling headsets to people. You're selling peripherals or something like that. You're selling software, video games, sales, whatever. Or you're doing, VR, or NFTs. Some decentralized services. Data mining is not really a big revenue driver in the industry today. It might be, but the problem is the market is so small that even if you got somebody who's willing to pay top dollar to go into Metaverse, it's not going to have the scale and scope. You just don't have that many eyeballs. I mean, just as a reference point, Rec Room, when it was touting how it's the biggest VR app, was counting monthly active users. 2 million monthly active users. Right. Just as a reference point, there are more active daily users of Candy Crush than there are total users in VR. Daily users for thing. So that's the thing. The advertising model, which is it's not just the small thing that Facebook does. Not the small thing. It is the core driver of their money. Is the core way they make money, is the way their customers understand them, it is the way their users interact with them. It's all based on a model that has no relevance to this other organization. Right. So they're either going to have to they're going to have to rip out their heart, put it off to the side, reinsert the new heart while the body is not dying, while the body is going, while the body's still alive, and do that, or they're just they're not going to make the transition. Instead, they're just making Valve's life easier because Valve is actually organized in such a way that it can take advantage of the next era. Maybe it won't be the biggest player, and maybe it's not. Maybe we're not sure. Is it software players, hardware, some combination? Is it blockchain spaces that do this? We don't know. But Valve is way better organized to take advantage of that sort of innovation than a company like Meta. And that's why I think it's going to drop.
I agree. I think one of the key things too is that for the people such as myself, possibly you and others like us that have adopted VR, like VR, right, as a tech, I think we as that demographic do not trust Facebook.
No, not even. No.
Not with that data.
No.
You already have so much data on me. Now you're going to know data of habits. You're going to have data of twitches where possibly if headsets get enough, you know where my eyes tend to move, right? You're going to have data to a point on people. And the thing is, and these are the early adopters, the people that you have to stand on first before you can expand to the bigger. You have to have our money. The difficulty Facebook is going to have is that reputation with that early adoptive platform.
You're absolutely right. I mean,
they're not going to have anything to stand on.
I'm just waiting. Sorry, you were saying.
Well, I was going to agree with you, what you said earlier about the people who are going to leave Facebook, those are the ones that will push it forward, and we'll
Yeah.
have faith in those individuals, right?
Yeah.
So go ahead.
The DNA of the organization is just, it's almost toxic. It's almost
Yes.
toxic to this next era. Because here's the thing, like, look, when I'm on Facebook, like, or anything, even a site like LinkedIn or Twitter, it's kind of like, look, I'm not the customer. I
Right.
am the product. I
Yep.
get that. I understand
Yep.
that relationship. But at the same time, I've paid them no money. I've given
Right.
them no money. I've given them no details. There's nothing there that they can know and use. They get data, but the way that, basically, like, I'm not the customer. But if I spend $300 on a headset, paying $20 per game, using all these different services, and now you're forcing me to log into Facebook to do that.
Yes.
Guess what? I'm not the product. I
Yes.
am the customer. I am not, I
Right.
don't want you to take all this information to try to make this wonderful experience. I don't trust you to make a wonderful experience for me. I
Yeah.
think you're going to make a quite awful experience because
Yes.
like, that's the thing. Like I think the pendulum has swung too far where we're too negative on social media as far as how culpable it is on all of these different social ills. It's done a
Right.
lot bad, but I don't think it's the evil people point it out to be. But at the same time, there needs to be some correction in the middle. I mean, that's why sites like Substack are getting big, where it's like, hey, you know what? I'd rather pay somebody for news that I can trust.
Yes.
And I'm the customer. I'm the customer, not you, not some advertiser, me.
Me. Yeah.
Right. And I'm willing to pay a lot of money to get news that isn't filtered through an algorithm on what's going to get the most clicks.
That's one of the big reasons, actually, believe it or not, I like Discord. Right? Is
Interesting.
that it's I'm sure they have data on me, but they're not right. They're not. I don't get hit with ads. I don't like. If I'm gonna social media with people, I'm gonna be on Discord.
That's a good.
I will. I will. Like, I don't want to. That's, to me, that's the best social media site there is. And like, that's how I look at it.
Interesting.
Like, in my opinion. Now, LinkedIn I use obviously for professional reasons, right? Like, you kind of have to. There's nothing wrong with taking advantage of some of those algorithms that you can.
No,
obviously, right? But yeah, I try to avoid all of that other stuff, right? Like Facebook and things. And yes, the people that are early adopters to this tech don't trust you.
no.
I think another big thing for me,
Mm-hmm.
when we're talking about kind of VR, the thing that one tech that I feel has been overlooked, and I understand why customers didn't respond to it. I did, however, or at least I saw something in it that I think could be big one day. And that is server-side gaming, right? So cloud platforms
Yes.
like Stadia or Luna. I can't remember what Amazon's is.
Yes.
The thing to me is, if we can get data centers in certain areas to lower latency beyond human perception, which is 200 milliseconds, that's how long it takes us to notice anything. Okay, so that's how long it takes your nervous system to send a signal to you from something, be processed, and then you actually become consciously aware of its existence. So 200 milliseconds is what we have to beat. If we ever wind up in a world where that's possible, to me, the problem with VR is that you're trying to stuff a lot of tech into some goggles, right? So eventually you're going to have to bring a backpack out, right?
Yeah.
That connects to it. You're going to have to figure out some kind of way to get components into it to push it further.
Yeah.
Or you have to rely on server-side gaming or server-side, right?
Computation. Yeah.
Computation.
Yeah.
So that, to me, is the other side of the VR conversation that has to be pushed forward at this point. Like, in order for VR to really take off into the world that they want, if we want people to be able, because I can see a world where VR is a big thing we all do, and real estate agents are now selling you houses not with a dining room, but with a VR room, right?
Yeah.
And like, I can see that being leveraged one day, where it's like, look, you have great VR space. We've padded all the walls in here. Look, your family could be, I could see it literally going that way. And then you'll have businesses wanting to rent or buy, server space, right, in VR.
Yeah.
Or whatever the case is. So I'm interested in seeing where that sort of goes and how those technologies might collide.
That's an interesting idea. And yeah, I mean that's the thing. That's why it's kind of why I'm so big on metaverse, because as opposed to blockchain, which we're starting to get to a point where I still think it's overhyped for what it is, where it
Mhm.
is today. Not as much as I thought earlier this year, but definitely still more on the overhyped side. VR is on the opposite end of the equation, where
Yeah,
it feels like, gee, holy shit, this is so much further than I expected, and no one cares.
dude.
Like this is so much further. I just went to an event this morning from Ethereal, basically, where they did VR fashion, basically, or whatever, and they had the
Nice.
showcase and alt space. It was cool to look around and see and get ideas. Where I'm like, okay, I'm starting to understand why this sort of stuff matters and what it could mean, because they were saying meta clothing or whatever, that you can do that, and really right now it's not super good or whatever.
Right.
But for images, especially for somebody like, God, because that's the thing. Like, we talk a lot, but the truth is that most of the people that I meet with don't know me personally. They know me through my posts and everything else. Having pictures of myself where I have my own virtual clothing on me that I don't own, like in physical reality, but I own in virtual reality, means that I can have a whole wardrobe that I'm wearing while we're on camera or whatever. And you would be, actually, that's the thing. It's not that you would be none the wiser. It's that my avatar has those things, and you know what my avatar is doing. And it's like, yeah, that idea makes sense to me. That you
Yeah.
could do that.
Yeah.
That it has value. Do that. So I think there's a lot of experimentation, but I tell people where it's like, that's the thing. I can sell people blockchain, and that's why I intended to. That's why we're starting this idea of, let's go see if we can start a Web3 school, because we think there's a big
Right.
opportunity for it. But if the biggest one is kind of like learn metaverse, learn VR, learn how to build assets, because there's going to be so much need for every person
Yeah.
to have their own unique spin. Because that's the thing. Like, you can build an app where people will come, but style, art, how you express yourself
Yep.
is unique to every individual. It's why there are so many damn web developers. It's not because we need
Yep.
more people who understand React. We need more people to build the vision of what other people want, their style, their brand, their ideas, their customers, which is infinite. So,
Yep.
that's going to be basically VR interaction developers inside of VR, and people who build art. And I think there's just going to be an infinite need for
Absolutely.
those folks.
I think there's going to be that, and I think also VR lends itself into interfacing with physical objects as well, potentially,
Oh my
right?
lord.
And so I see that with like this is something that kind of got me into VR, kind of thinking about all these technologies. Actually, this is why I love freaking tech, right? Like, I mean, it's an amazing space, but I don't know if we're over time yet, but
We can
I'm
go in.
okay. The big thing for me is that, I'm looking at trucking, right? Like the
Right.
logistics industry, coming from a truck driver, and I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, okay, there's not really a better fuel source, right? Other than
Not right
like
now.
energy, right? Other than like we need to figure out some kind of way to get really good batteries on the back of these semi trucks. We can get better efficiency in our civilization. We can get resources to where they need to be quicker, right? And it's bandwidth. It's another bandwidth issue. Like less people driving on the roads making wrecks, less all of that. We need better efficiency. So let's automate these systems. Let's get automated cars, let's get automated trucks, right? Truck drivers don't have to stop to pee, right?
Right,
I
right.
mean, that's
Yeah.
just they don't have to. They just keep rolling. And then so okay, we're creating this system, right? The interesting thing to me is that there's going to be a bridge where we need it. We have drone technology coming out and all these different kinds of
That's
things,
right.
right? And you can see like police officers maybe having drone backup, right? Rather than anything else. So that's a little bit different. You have operators, all these kinds of things. I see it interfacing VR a lot with these types of technologies, and sort of from there it will grow even more. I
I'll,
think I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah, let me put this bug in you, because I was thinking about this morning of what
Yeah.
technologies I want to see next. So, right now we have technologies where you and I can go someplace else in the
Yep.
world, in virtual reality, but
It
it's
doesn't even exist, but
right.
or it does.
Right, and there. I think then the next innovation is then going to be get us to go visit someplace that does physically exist, but we're there virtually.
Virtually.
So, like, you basically, I can't imagine the technology. Again, it's hard, but I'm sure that
Right.
if you could put multiple cameras in a certain space, and you have enough AI that's sitting behind it that can do a good job predicting what's actually there, in
Right.
theory, you could then basically place a camera anywhere in that room, and it, because of the actual physical cameras, a virtual camera could sit there. And so a virtual camera then could be like a VR headset. And
Yep.
if it knows I'm in a certain place, all of a sudden I can walk around a real museum live, happening someplace
Yes.
else in the world, and go and do that. So now virtual reality, I'm put in a different place. Then the next step is, okay, then how do we make a physical representation of you through light or video or something to show where you are in the room so I can see you, and then you and I can be sitting there. You're physically there, I'm virtually there. We're sitting there communicating with one another, and now you're represented virtually in my space, and I'm physically represented in your space in some place. And now all of a sudden, there's two-way communication there.
Yep.
That is that level, and I think honestly, it's just how good is camera technology and how good is holographics, basically. To get you there. How good and that's the thing. I don't know what it's going to take to physically represent you to make that happen. But I think the idea of take many cameras and put it into a space, there, and the lower quality you can get away with, the better.
Right.
But then basically it's like, okay, well, all the cameras see the space. And so if you virtually have a camera here and you're looking out into the world, what am I able to see? And can I convincingly put that there? And all of a sudden now it becomes really, really interesting to have me just walk around this other room. It's not in VR. It's a physical space that's just projecting into this thing, like a live stream, but just so much more. But again, the infrastructure need to do that at scale is just incredible. So man, it's just like, man, we got to just keep cranking that hardware engine, man.
We do. I think that was the second part to that equation to me. It was like that sort of cloud side that's going to be, needed, having kind of what I saw with Stadia and things like that. Like, I think that is where our processing power can come from, but it's all about that latency, right? Because it has to be convincing. Yeah. If it's a millisecond off from our 200 millisecond nervous system delay, right? And we notice, somebody will notice, somebody who's really good at any video game. If you're not very good at a video game, you won't notice latency sometimes. Right. But if you're really good at a video game and you're dialed in, you're going to notice that input. So latency. So it's very important we have to cater to them to make sure that, because it's not about zero latency, right? It's about being better than us. That's really what it is. So, and I'm interested to see how that develops. And I think you're absolutely right. Like, I can see where that's headed. And I think that's exactly what we as a species want. We want to escape our bodies. We do. I think that is honestly the goal. It's just the one we don't know about or we're not aware of. Yeah. And I think that's exactly what we're looking for, is other mechanisms to put output into and receive input from. That's
a very interesting conclusion, and as good a place to stop as any. So, all right, Nick, that was an awesome discussion. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to do it.
All right, have a good day.
Have a good one. See you, man.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.